At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. In the end, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name's General G. Let's begin. The administrative officer extended a hand, an elegant three-fingered limb, covered in fine plumage patterned in intricate violet and green, shimmered with his movements. The gesture was a rare offer of greeting, one Merrick Arkady had memorized from the Concord Cultural Primer. He returned the gesture, his own hand feeling clumsy and brutish by comparison. "Welcome to the Aegis, Private Arkady," the officer chirped, his translator rendering the sound into formal prose. "You are the first of your kind to visit these halls. A great honor." "The honor is all mine, sir," Merrick said, keeping his voice even. He focused on the handshake. The primer was explicit. Grip strength varies wildly. Default to minimal pressure. Most species perceive a firm human handshake as an act of aggression. He pictured himself holding a delicate bird's egg. He applied just enough force to make contact, the barest whisper of a squeeze. A faint, dry crunch sounded, like fine gravel being ground under a boot. The officer's beak snapped shut, and his chirping cadence went flat. The feathers on his neck, which shifted from violet to green with the light, flared. A motion so subtle, Merrick almost missed it. He retracted his hand with a jerky swiftness, tucking it behind his back as if touching fire. The muscles around his beak tightened into a rigid approximation of a smile. "Your squad assignment is that way," he managed, gesturing with his other, presumably intact hand. "Report to the muster grounds immediately." A knot of cold dread formed in Merrick's gut. "Sir, are you—" "Immediately, Private." The words were still polite, but the tone was as brittle as the bones he had just crushed. Merrick snapped a salute, turned, and walked away. Being the first human in the Concord's most prestigious military academy felt less like an honor and more like a liability. 5 minutes on campus, and he had already broken an officer. This would be a long tour. Squad 9 was a collection of galactic odds and ends huddled together on the vast, sun-bleached muster grounds. Merrick found his name on the roster next to a disparate crew that made him feel conspicuously fleshy. A small furry creature with enormous, perpetually worried eyes and fur with a faint, coppery sheen saw him approach and immediately tried to hide behind a taller cadet. The creature, a Mixian named Pip, stood only to Merrick's knee. The cadet he was hiding behind, a tessellate named Orna, stood as a living fortress of overlapping bony plates. The plates were a calm, stony gray, and they tightened, the seams between them vanishing as she focused her gaze on him. She met Merrick's gaze and gave a slow, deliberate nod, her facial segments staying rigid. The Karak, Ryax, stood magnificent and tall. His slender body consisted of articulated segments of a dark, biometallic composite with a matte finish, reflecting a dull sheen like polished hematite. He moved with a stiff, proud gait, his chin equivalent angled high. He glanced dismissively at Merrick, his inspection lingering on the soft uniform and the form beneath it. A faint, condescending scoff was his only greeting. Before Merrick could offer one of his own, a shadow fell over them. A sharp, rhythmic clicking sound echoed on the permacrete. Sergeant Turkon had arrived. The drill instructor was an 8-foot-tall Vrisk, a slender being whose body was a study in tense, economical lines. His skin, a polished anthracite hue, stretched taut over a powerful frame. Its surface so dark it seemed to have no reflection. He possessed 2 main arms, long and powerful, resting at his sides, while 2 smaller, secondary manipulators folded neatly at his waist. He turned his head with a smooth, gyroscopic stability, and his single, large optic, a pool of what looked like liquid mercury, fixed on each cadet in turn, assessing them. "You are Squad 9? his translator intoned. His voice originated from resonating chambers in his chest, clipped, formal, and cold. "You are disorganized, undisciplined, a tactical absurdity of diversity. My purpose is to correct this. I will forge you into a weapon. The forge will break and discard the unworthy. I hold all to this standard." He started his inspection, moving with an unnerving, economical motion. Stopping before each cadet, he tapped Orna's chest plate with a delicate secondary manipulator, producing a dull thud. "Durable, slow." He paused before Pip, who trembled violently. "Fragile, anxious." He faced Ryax, taking a long moment to admire his Kaurok physiology. "Concord's pride. Uphold that pride." He stopped in front of Merrick. He circled him, his heavy boot falls the only sound. His single optic moved from Merrick's boots to his head, a biological scan cataloging flaws. "Soft," the translator announced. "Poorly balanced, insufficient design. Your species is a political experiment, Private Arcady. A footnote in the Concord's grand integration project." He stopped directly in front of Merrick. "Footnotes are a waste of my time. You will receive the same consideration as every other cadet. Keep up." He dismissed Merrick with a turn and moved on. The barracks design favored a Kaurok. Everything was rigid, unyielding, and calibrated for a species whose density was closer to solid steel than flesh and blood. For Merrick, it was a minefield of potential destruction. He sat on his assigned bunk, a mattress, a smart gel pad built to support a few 100 kilograms of biometallic composite, compressed instantly into a thin, useless wafer under his weight. The metal frame groaned in protest. He would be sleeping on steel for the foreseeable future. He moved to his locker, a tall, imposing metal cabinet. The latch stuck. Applying what he thought was a reasonable amount of torque, he gave it a firm tug. The handle ripped cleanly from its housing, leaving him holding a useless piece of steel. From across the room, Ryax watched, the corner of his metallic hue lips lifting in a sneer. "Having trouble with basic equipment, human?" Ryax's voice was as smooth and hard as polished alloy. "It's just a little stiff," Merrick muttered, trying to reattach the handle. A nervous clicking sound came from his feet. Pip, the small Mixian, scurried forward, his large eyes wide, darting between Merrick and the broken locker. He held up a small device, bristling with tools. "I can fix it for you," he squeaked, his voice a rapid-fire staccato. You're stronger than the mechanism's design allows. The standard settings buckle under the force you're putting out. I can reinforce the lock and adjust the release pressure." "Thanks, Pip," Merrick said, stepping back to give the tiny technician room. "I'd appreciate that." Pip went to work, his nimble digits making a series of minute adjustments to the locker's control panel. A moment later, the door slid open with a soft hiss. "There," Pip said, looking up at Merrick, his grin wide, though his ears still twitched nervously. "Adjusted for human." Merrick looked from the tiny engineer to the sneering Kaurok across the room. Maybe he could find a place here. The first physical assessment established a baseline. For the Concorde, strength meant durability and sustained force output. The primary test was the power lift. It involved hoisting a 150-kilogram weight block from the floor to chest height for as many repetitions as possible before structural fatigue set in. Merrick watched as the other cadets took their turns. Orna managed a respectable 8 reps, her movements slow and powerful. Most other species hovered around 5 or 6. Then it was Ryax's turn. He approached the block, his posture broadcasting confidence. He lifted it with a smooth, rigid motion, his metallic form moving with ease. He completed 12 repetitions before setting the block down with a resounding thud. A murmur of approval went through the watching cadets. His score was the day's highest. Sergeant Turcon made a notation on his datapad. "Arcady, you are next." Merrick stepped up to the block. He crouched, getting a firm grip. It felt light. He straightened his legs, lifting it easily to his chest. He set it down and lifted it again, and again. He fell into a steady rhythm, the kind he'd use for stacking hay bales back home. The motion was simple, the weight manageable. He assumed it was an endurance trial, a test of how long one could maintain a consistent pace. He passed Ryax's score of 12 and continued. At 20, the murmuring stopped. At 30, the other cadets were staring, their expressions locked in disbelief. At 50, Ryax stood motionless, his usual confident posture vanished. Merrick found a rhythm, his mind wandering. He wondered what was for lunch. He wondered if Pip could rig the sonic shower to have a little more pressure. He considered if the avian officer he'd injured had healed yet. He was on his 74th rep when Sergeant Turcon moved to stand directly in front of him, head tilted in an analytic posture. Merrick kept going. 80, 85, 90. A light burn started in his shoulders, the pleasant ache of a good workout starting. He could continue indefinitely. At 93, Turcon spoke. "Halt!" his translator commanded. Merrick stopped mid-lift and placed the block on the floor. His breathing was steady and even. "You are disrupting the testing schedule, Private," Turcon stated, his voice flat. He made another note on his datapad. His single optic remained inscrutable. Merrick looked around. The entire platoon stared at him in a silence broken only by the gym's ventilation hum. The mess hall at the Aegis was a cacophony of clicks, chirps, and rumbles, a testament to the Concord military's sheer biological diversity. Merrick sat with his squad, navigating the rehydrated nutrient block onto his utensil. The dense, khaki-colored substance tasted faintly of toasted yeast. He had already bent 3 spoons that week. Another squad interrupted their meal, led by a Karak even larger and more powerfully built than Ryax. His name was Quar, and he moved with the swagger of a creature accustomed to getting his way. Rumor had it, his family line was infamous for plate shearing, a deep cultural shame that Quar seemed determined to overcompensate for with aggressive posturing. Quar's squad moved past their table, and he deliberately singled out the smallest target. He stopped by Pip, who was trying to make himself invisible. "Look at this," Quar sneered, his voice a low, grinding sound. "The Aegis is accepting vermin now." He flicked Pip's food tray with a casual, cruel motion. The tray spun through the air, splattering the nutrient slurry across the floor. Pip flinched, curling into a tight, furry ball. Merrick was on his feet in an instant. He stepped between Quar and Pip, a quiet, solid presence. Quar scoffed. "Get out of my way, soft body, or do you want your food on the floor too?" He pushed forward, expecting Merrick to stumble back. Merrick placed his open palm flat against the center of Quar's plated chest to halt his advance. Quar's forward momentum met a solid wall, the impact perfectly absorbed. His heavy body stopped instantly, as if he had walked into a reinforced bulkhead. The only sound was a low, resonant creak as Quar's metallic joints strained against the sudden, absolute stop. He took a half step back, driven by the sheer physical shock. He stared at Merrick, his wide, metallic optical sensors dilating in disbelief. A soft, fleshy creature had stopped him cold. The concept was so alien that he stood momentarily stunned. He looked from Merrick's calm face to the unmoving hand on his chest, then back again. He turned and stalked away, his squad trailing in his wake like confused pilot fish. Merrick lowered his hand and turned back to his table. Orna gave him that same slow, deliberate nod. Pip was staring up at him, his large eyes bright with awe. But Ryax's expression captured his attention. The Karak's usual contempt had vanished. He stared at Merrick as if at an unsolved equation, a puzzle that defied the fundamental laws of physics. Sergeant Turcon observed the training exercise from the command center, his focus on a bank of monitors displaying feeds from the obstacle course. Squad 9 approached the final challenge, the Wall of Valor. It was a 5-meter sheer surface, meant to test a cadet's strength, agility, and ability to use the provided magnetic handholds. Ryax ascended with powerful, certain movements, gripping and releasing each handhold with perfect efficiency. Orna moved with slow, deliberate power. Pip used a grav-assist pack with surprising skill. Then Turkon focused on the human. Private Arcady stood at the wall's base, looking up. Turkon anticipated a struggle. The human's flexible form seemed ill-suited for this kind of climbing. His biology, so different from a Karok's dense metallic frame, or the advantages of multiple limbs of other species, seemed a disadvantage. Turkon tapped his secondary manipulator's fingers on the console in an impatient rhythm. On the screen, Merrick took a few steps back. He broke into a short, explosive run. Turkon's analytical mind processed the velocity and trajectory. The trajectory was wrong. His aim bypassed the first handhold. Merrick's boot struck the wall just below its halfway point. The impact should have resulted in a pathetic slide back to the ground. Instead, the monitor displayed a massive spike in kinetic energy transfer. The human's leg muscles, visible even through his uniform, contracted with explosive power. He ran up the wall for one gravity-defying step. That single step launched him upwards. He vaulted the remaining distance, his body an arc of controlled power. He slapped one hand on the wall's top and pulled himself over in one fluid movement. Turkon stared at the screen. The entire maneuver had taken less than 3 seconds. The other squads were still struggling with the magnetic grips. He isolated the footage of Arcady. He replayed it at 1/10 speed. The replay revealed the alien architecture of mammalian muscle contracting and expanding. The replay showed the complex articulation of the ankle and knee, the explosive power uncoiling from the hip. The system, attempting to categorize the action, flashed a notification. Locomotion anomaly, uncatalogued kinetic event. Turkon leaned back, the powerful knuckles of his primary hands rapping against each other. He emitted a low guttural thrum from his chest, the brisk equivalent of a sincere curse. Hand-to-hand combat training was Merrick's greatest fear. Padded mats covered the floor, and instructors controlled the exercises. But he was a hammer in a room full of glass sculptures. Every movement was a calculation, a constant battle against his own biology. Sergeant Turkon, a connoisseur of irony, paired him with Ryax. The Karok form is the epitome of martial design, Turkon announced to the class. Dense, durable, powerful. The human form is flexible. We will now demonstrate a basic hip throw. Private Arcady, you will execute the technique. Cadet Ryax, you will provide appropriate resistance. Ryax grinned, a sharp, angular expression. My pleasure, Sergeant. Merrick's heart beat a heavy rhythm against his ribs. He faced Ryax, holding his hands up, uncertain where to put them. Okay, look, he murmured, keeping his voice low. I'll go slow. Just go with it. Yield to the movement. Are you offering me advice on combat, human? Ryax sneered. Focus on your own flailing. Execute the maneuver, Private! Turkon's voice cut through the air. Merrick took a deep breath. He moved with painstaking care, mirroring the holographic instructor's movements. He secured a grip on Ryax's arm and tunic. He pivoted, sinking his weight. The move was textbook. He applied the absolute minimum force required to unbalance the Karok. He was concentrating so hard on gentleness that beads of sweat formed on his brow. Ryax, determined to prove his superiority, resisted at the final moment. He tensed his body, trying to fight the leverage. Ryax went over his hip. In his last-second attempt to resist, he locked his arm rigid at an awkward angle. The throw's rotational force, though gentle, met unyielding rigidity. A sharp, high-pitched screech sounded like stressed metal giving way. Ryax cried out, a sharp sound of surprise and pain. He clutched his left arm, his features tightening. A network of hairline cracks radiated from his elbow, the polished hematite of his metallic plating marred by the ugly, lighter lines of structural failure. A thin, dark, viscous fluid seeped from the largest crack. The training hall fell silent. Medics swarmed the mat. Sergeant Turkon loomed over Merrick, his posture rigid, his bladed limbs held tight against his body. "Private Arcady, explain this profound lack of control." Merrick could only stare as medics lifted Ryax onto a grav stretcher. He had tried so hard to be careful, using less force than he would to close a stubborn jar of pickles. And he had broken the strongest cadet in the class. A cold certainty settled in his gut. He was dangerous. The medbay was sterile and quiet. A shimmering stasis field encased Ryax's damaged arm. A medic had already fused the worst cracks, leaving a dull, welded seam across the polished hematite. It looked like a scar. Merrick hesitated at the doorway, the apology he'd rehearsed dying on his lips. He expected fury, accusations, a demand for his immediate expulsion. Instead, Ryax looked at him, his usual arrogance giving way to a quiet, unnerving intensity. He gestured to the chair beside his slab. Merrick sat. They were silent for a long time. Merrick listened to the medical equipment's hum. "How?" Ryax asked. His voice was a low rasp. The question bypassed the throw, the apology. "The medics analyzed the impact data. The force was minimal, statistically insignificant, yet my plating failed." Merrick swallowed. This was harder than any physical test. "The force was secondary," he said, struggling to find the words. "It was the transfer, the velocity. Your body absorbs impact through rigidity, while mine generates force through contraction." Ryax fixed his gaze on him, demanding more. "My muscles are bundles of fibers," Merrick began, feeling like a field biologist explaining an eldritch horror. "When I exert myself, those fibers tear. On a microscopic level, the exertion damages them. Then my body repairs them, making them thicker and stronger than before. We get stronger by constantly breaking ourselves." Ryax stared at him, his metallic eyes wide. "You live your entire lives wounded?" "That's a dramatic way of putting it," Merrick countered, realizing how it must sound. "It's just how we work. Our bones are a composite framework with a soft, living core that produces new cells. They can flex under pressure. They can break and then mend themselves, returning stronger than before." He gestured helplessly. "Our bodies are designed for damage and repair. Yours is designed for integrity. The throw was about torque over impact. You locked your arm to resist a direct push, but the throw twisted it. Your biology is incredibly strong against compression, but that kind of torsion on a rigid joint, it sheared the plates at the joint." "So your strength comes from being breakable," Ryax said, a new respect in his voice. "You are strong because you are always broken." Sergeant Turkon's office was as Spartan and efficient as the Vrisk himself. The office held only a desk, a chair, and a series of data pads arranged with geometric order. Merrick stood at attention before the desk, fixing his gaze on the far wall. On its surface, Turkon had pulled up several files. Merrick recognized the headers. Human physiology, an overview. Kinetic output potentials in high-gravity bipeds. Cellular regeneration and myofibrillar hypertrophy. A bright orange biohazard warning icon flagged each datapad. Turkon finished reading a report, then swiveled his head to fix his single, liquid optic on Merrick. The office ventilation's low hum filled the silence. "Are you deliberately failing, Private Arcady?" the translator asked, the question sharp and direct. Is your goal to appear incompetent? Your performance records show a consistent pattern of failure in all tasks requiring fine motor control, equipment interaction, and interpersonal engagement. Yet your gross metabolic output exceeds all known Aegis records by a factor of 12. Explain this contradiction. Merrick's jaw tightened. No, Sergeant. Then explain the discrepancies, Turkin commanded. Explain the broken locker handle. Explain the fractured cadet. Explain why you treat every piece of standard issue equipment as if it were a delicate explosive device. Merrick's composure shattered. Because it is, Sergeant. Everything here is. I am trying to keep from breaking it. I'm trying to keep from breaking everyone. The handshake with the administrator on day 1, I think I turned his finger bones into dust, and I was trying to be gentle. The power lift, I stopped because you gave the order. I could have gone on all day. That throw? Sergeant, I used less force than I would to open a door. I spend every second of every day terrified that I'll miscalculate and kill someone by accident. My goal is to survive basic training without leaving a trail of broken bodies and equipment in my wake. He stood there, chest heaving, his confession hanging in the quiet office. Turkon remained perfectly still, processing this new data. He tilted his head, the brisk equivalent of a raised eyebrow. I see, Turkon's translator stated after a long pause. Your mission has changed, Private Arkady, he said, his voice taking on a new, calculating tone. Your power is an established, if inconvenient, fact. Now you must prove your restraint. Your strength is irrelevant. Your control is everything. From this moment forward, your sole objective is to impress me with your finesse. Delicacy is your new standing order. Dismissed! Merrick snapped a salute and left the office. The exercise was simple. Cross a 50-meter ravine. The catch, the drop had damaged the standard-issue portable bridge kit, bending its primary struts and cracking its power cell. It was a classic leadership and ingenuity test. While other squads descended into bickering and futile attempts to repair the delicate machinery, Squad 9 stood apart, assessing the situation. The struts are compromised, Ryax announced, his analytical gaze sweeping over the useless kit. Applying force would cause a catastrophic structural failure. I could probably bypass the cracked cell casing, Pip clicked, already fiddling with a diagnostic tool. But it would take at least 30 minutes to stabilize. We would lose too much time. Merrick gazed from the broken bridge to the surrounding landscape. The moon they were on was an ancient petrified world. Nearby, half buried in the ochre dust, lay the fossilized trunk of some colossal prehistoric tree. The fossil was essentially a stone log, easily 10 meters long and thick as a shuttle. An idea sparked in his mind, ridiculous and yet possible. He looked at his teammates. What about that? He asked, nodding toward the log. Ryax followed his gaze and scoffed. That is a multi-ton geological feature, Arkady. That's part of the landscape itself. Pip, Merrick said, ignoring Ryax. Get a structural density scan. Find the center of mass. Pip, ever eager to help, scurried over and ran his scanner over the massive object. Density is consistent. Center of mass is here, he squeaked, projecting a small glowing green dot onto the log's surface. Merrick looked at Orna. The stoic tessellate watched him. She seemed to understand his plan. Silently, she moved to the ravine's edge, planting her wide, sturdy feet and bracing herself. She would be his pivot point, a living anchor. Then Merrick looked at Ryax. The Karok stared at him, skepticism warring with the memory of the weight block. Ryax held his gaze for a long second, then gave a single, hesitant nod. Guide him, he commanded to the others. Keep the load balanced. The single nod was all Merrick needed. He approached the log, dug his boots into the loose soil for footing, and got his shoulder under the massive weight. He took a deep, shuddering breath and straightened his legs. The world narrowed to a single point of agonizing pressure. The petrified wood groaned. Dust and pebbles rained from its surface, with a surge of power that sent a tremor through the ground. He heaved the colossal log onto his shoulders. It was heavier than he'd imagined, a crushing, immense weight that threatened to drive him into the ground. "Left side needs to come up slightly, Merrick." Ryak's voice was a commander's sharp call. "Orna, be ready." Merrick adjusted, his muscles screaming in protest. He stepped, then took another, staggering toward the ravine's edge where Orna stood like a statue. Guided by his squad's calls, he pivoted, using Orna's plated shoulder as a fulcrum to swing the log's far end across the chasm. It landed on the other side with a thunderous boom that echoed through the canyon. Squad 9 had its bridge. They crossed first, winning the exercise by a wide margin. From a hidden observation post a kilometer away, Sergeant Turkon watched the entire event unfold on a high magnification scope. He lowered the device, his single optic blinking. He made a single notation on his datapad: Control improving. Microgravity combat was the great equalizer. In the zero-G arena, brute strength was a liability. A powerful shove would send you careening into a wall just as fast as your opponent. The contest became one of leverage, momentum, and finesse. Here, Merrick, paradoxically, shone. Quar and his squad, still smarting from the mess hall incident, saw the zero-G training as their chance for payback. They cornered Squad 9 in the spherical arena's center, expecting Merrick to be a clumsy, flailing target. "We have you trapped now, soft body," Quar gloated, pushing off a nearby wall to launch himself toward Merrick. Merrick stayed loose, waiting. As Quar reached him, Merrick met his charge with finesse. He caught Quar's outstretched arm, his fingers wrapping around the Karok's wrist. Instead of stopping him, Merrick used Quar's own momentum. He pulled slightly and twisted, spinning his body in a tight, controlled pirouette. Quar, his trajectory altered, flew past Merrick instead of into him. The redirection sent the bulky Karok sailing helplessly into a padded wall, where he bounced off with a surprised grunt. Two of Quar's squadmates came at him from opposite sides. Merrick kicked off the floor, launching himself into a slow-motion somersault. He drifted between them as they collided with each other in a clang of metal on metal. He was learning. Turkon's words echoed in his mind: control over strength. Here, in the absence of gravity, his fine motor control and deep understanding of leverage were his greatest assets. He moved with a new confidence, flowing with the zero-G environment. From her position near the arena's edge, Orna watched Merrick's performance. Her stout, plated form stood perfectly still, anchored by magnetic boots. Her posture, for the first time since they had met, seemed to convey approval. The plasma rifle range was an exercise in stability. The standard Concord rifle's calibration suited a Karok's rigid frame. It had a significant energy kickback designed for a solid, unyielding shoulder to absorb and dissipate. For most other species, it was like firing a small cannon. Cadets lined the firing stalls, their shots straying as they fought to control the recoil. Even Ryax, with his perfect form, had to reset his stance after every few shots. Then Merrick took his turn. He lifted the rifle, settling the stock into his shoulder. The weapon felt solid, balanced. He took a deep breath, let half of it out, and squeezed the trigger. A bolt of blue plasma shot down range, hitting the target dead center. The kickback arrived an instant later, a solid punch of force. Merrick's body absorbed it. He kept his feet planted, his aim held steady. The complex, interconnected system of muscle, tendon, and flexible bone that Turkon had dismissed as an inefficient design acted as a self-correcting shock absorber. He fired again and again. A tight, steady rhythm. Each shot struck the bullseye. The recoil that sent others staggering felt to him like a gentle nudge. He emptied the power pack, leaving a single blackened hole in the center of his target. He set the rifle down and turned. The range officer was staring at his target screen, mouth agape. His squad was looking at him with a new expression. Ryax walked over, glancing at Merrick's score, then back at his own respectable yet scattered grouping. He muttered a single word in the Karok language, a low, rumbling sound. Tevron. Pip, who had a knack for linguistics, overheard it. He scurried up to Merrick, his eyes wide with excitement. Tevron, it's a geological term. It means a stable massif, an immovable mountain, an anchor. He grinned. Anchor, I like it. Merrick found Orna in a quiet alcove off the main barracks, performing her daily maintenance ritual. She polished her thick armored plates with a soft cloth, her movements slow and full of purpose. He stood there for a moment, just watching. She glanced up as if expecting him. You have questions, Merrick Arkady? She said, her voice a low, pleasant rumble like stones shifting deep underground. She made it a statement. Why are you unafraid of me? Merrick asked, the words coming out in a rush. Everyone else is. At least they were. Orna paused her polishing and looked up at him. Her deep-set eyes were steady within her plated face. Fear is a response to a threat. You are a protector who has yet to learn the shape of his shield. Merrick frowned, confused. My strength is a weapon more than a shield. I break things. Anything can be a weapon, Orna rumbled. She tapped a huge thick plate on her own forearm. This is my armor. It is hard and unyielding. It can shatter a Karok's fist if he is foolish enough to strike it. It could be a weapon. She lowered her arm. But its purpose is different. Its purpose is to stand between my comrades and harm. It is a shield for others, before it is for myself. She set down her cloth and met his gaze, her facial plates setting into hard lines. Your strength is your armor, Merrick Arkady, she said, her slow, deliberate words sinking deep into his soul. It is the biggest shield I have ever seen. You just hold it so tightly. You forget you can use it to protect others. Quar cornered them near the training grounds, his ego still raw from the public humiliations in the mess hall and the Zero-G arena. He swaggered up to Merrick and Ryax, a belligerent sneer on his face. He pointed a sharp, mineral finger at a large discarded block of plasteel composite, left over from a construction project. I'm tired of your tricks, soft body, Quar growled. No gravity to help you, no confined spaces, just strength. A true test of strength. Let's see you shatter that block, or are you all talk? Before Merrick could even formulate a refusal, Ryax stepped forward, positioning himself squarely between Merrick and Quar. Our squad's strength is for protection, rather than pointless destruction, Ryax said, his voice ringing with a new firmness. We have nothing to prove to you. Quar's sneer twisted into a snarl of fury. Another Karok had dismissed him, one defending a human. The insult was too much. You defend this thing? Have you forgotten what you are? He shoved Ryax hard in the chest. A Karok on Karok shove, meant to establish dominance, caught Ryax unprepared, and he staggered back. Merrick shot his hand out, catching Ryax's arm and steadying him. He then turned his head, his calm, quiet gaze landing on Quar. His voice was low. His posture remained calm. He raised his right hand in front of him and deliberately clenched it into a fist. The sound of his knuckles popping, crack, 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 was loud in the sudden silence. The small, organic sound carried more menace than any shout could. It resembled a biological machine engaging its gears. Walk away, Merrick said, his voice a low, even murmur. Quar looked from the fist to Merrick's dead, calm eyes and flinched. He was facing a predator. He took a hesitant step back, then another, before turning and retreating with as much dignity as he could muster. Ryak straightened his tunic, watching Quar go. He then looked at Merrick, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "Impressive," he said. "Maximum intimidation, zero energy expenditure. Turkon would approve. His family line is infamous for plate shearing. He projects his own vulnerabilities." Sergeant Turkon stood before the assembled platoon, a holographic map of a small, pockmarked moon floating behind him. The cadets in the briefing room sat at attention, the silence charged. This was it, the final test. "This is the Crucible," Turkon's translator announced, his voice stark and official. "For the next 48 standard hours, you will deploy to the surface of Incus, a tectonically unstable moonlet in the outer system. Your mission is a search and rescue simulation. You will locate, stabilize, and evacuate several simulated casualties while navigating hazardous terrain and evading automated drone opposition." He gestured to the map, highlighting treacherous canyons and regions of high seismic activity. "We programmed the dangers. The environment is authentic. Incus is geologically active. Tremors are frequent. Rock slides are a constant threat. Your equipment is real. Your teamwork must be real." He swept his gaze across the rows of cadets, lingering on each of them. "Your graduation depends on your ability to work as a cohesive unit. It depends on your discipline, your intelligence, and your control." He finished his speech, then turned his head, deliberately locking his gaze onto Squad 9 and then Merrick. "Resilience on brute force in this environment ensures failure. It will lead to your squad's demise. Do you understand me, Private?" Merrick met his instructor's optic. He thought of Orna's words, of Ryax's defense, the quiet confidence he had found in control. "Understood, Sergeant," Merrick said, his voice clear and steady. Squad 9's drop shuttle touched down on the surface of Incus with a soft crunch of landing gear on dusty regolith. The ground beneath them trembled, a constant low-frequency hum that vibrated up through the soles of their boots. They moved out in a familiar tactical spread. Pip took point, his scanner sweeping the terrain ahead, sniffing out drone patrols and geological instabilities. Orna moved on the flank, her heavy, plated form providing mobile cover, a walking bulwark. Ryax navigated, his sharp Karok mind interpreting the topographical data and plotting their course through the ravines. Merrick brought up the rear. He had become the squad's pack mule and their mobile anchor point. His massive primary power cell for their equipment was strapped to his back, a load that would have crushed any other two cadets. When Pip needed to take a sensitive reading on the unstable ground, Merrick would plant his feet, becoming a living tripod, a bedrock of flesh and bone that absorbed the moon's constant tremors. They moved with a quiet coordination that drew envious glances from other squads. Their movements were economical, their communications succinct. They bypassed a drone patrol by using a narrow crevice Ryax had spotted. They located their first objective, a cache of medical supplies hidden in a shallow cave, and secured it. They were navigating a wide canyon when the big one hit. The tremor differed from the persistent hum they had grown used to. It started as a low roar that rose from the planet's core, a sound that resonated in their bones. The ground lurched violently, throwing everyone off their feet. Merrick instinctively dropped to one knee, the heavy power cell on his back slamming him down. But his low center of gravity kept him from falling completely. A deep groaning crack echoed through the canyon as a fissure split the ground a dozen meters away, venting a cloud of hot, acrid gas. Then came the rock slide. High above them, a section of the canyon wall sheared away. A torrent of rock and dust, tons of it, thundered down into the canyon floor just ahead of their position. The ground shook with the impact. A frantic, garbled voice screamed over the platoon-wide comms. "Under fire! No,
Wait, the wall is, static! We're trapped! Quar, get...
Crunch! The transmission ended in a sickening burst of static. The voice was from Quar's squad. They were just ahead, moving with more haste than caution. A moment later, Turkon's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and authoritative.
All squads, this is Aegis Actual. I am terminating the exercise. I repeat, the exercise is terminated. A geological event has exceeded simulation parameters. Fall back to designated rally point Alpha. Acknowledge.
The simulation was over, but Ryax was already pointing toward the massive fresh pile of rock and dust that choked the canyon ahead. "They're over there," he said, his voice grim. Merrick looked at the rock slide, then back at his squad. Orna was already checking her plasma rifle's charge. Pip was adjusting his scanner for life sign detection through solid rock. The squad held its position. They found what remained of Quar's squad at the rock slide's base. Most of them were scattered, dazed, and covered in dust, but alive. One, however, was trapped. A cadet was pinned beneath a single massive slab of flat, granite-like rock that had sheared off the cliff face. He was trapped from the waist down, and the pressure was visibly crushing his armor. Quar was there, scrabbling futilely at the stone's edge, his usual arrogance giving way to raw, desperate panic. Just then, Sergeant Turkon descended on a controlled burst from a jump pack, landing near the chaotic scene. He took in the scene with a glance. He placed a hand on Quar's shoulder. "Stand down, cadet. The mass is too great. There is no leverage. You will only make it worse." His translator was cold, pragmatic. "We must wait for heavy lift gear." Pip, who had his scanner aimed at the trapped cadet, let out a terrified squeak.
"Sir, his internal armor pressure is critical. His biosigns are fading. He only has moments."
Turkon's posture stiffened. Merrick looked at the rock. He looked at the dying cadet. He looked at the desperate faces of his friends and at Turkon, whose by-the-book rigidity was now a death sentence. He decided. He stepped forward. "Sir," he said, his voice cutting through the panic, "with all due respect, we can act now." Turkon swiveled his head to face him. Merrick ignored him. He moved to the slab's edge, planting his feet and digging his boots deep into the loose soil, seeking bedrock. He crouched, finding purchase with his hands on the stone's rough, sharp edge. As he prepared to lift, the undersuit of his standard-issue armor, meant for beings of normal physiology, strained against the flesh beneath it. The advanced, flexible fabric stretched taut, becoming semi-transparent under the stress. And for the first time, the assembled cadets and Sergeant Turkon saw what human biology truly looked like under load. Human biology under load differed from the dense, rigid mechanics of a Karok or the tightly coiled power of a Vrisk. The sight was alien, terrifying. His back shoulder and his leg muscles swelled, contracting in thick, powerful bundles that shifted and writhed beneath his skin like a nest of living cables. Veins stood out like thick cords across his arms. The display was a grotesque and horrifying tableau of raw, biological machinery, a living engine of meat and sinew, preparing to unleash a phenomenal amount of power. Turkon had studied the data. He had seen the scans. But to witness the living, breathing machine in action was something else entirely. It defied all known principles of efficient biological design. The sight was monstrous. A nearby cadet from another squad, his face slack with disbelief, gave voice to the thought screaming in Turkon's own analytical mind. He pointed a trembling finger at the spectacle of Merrick's straining form, his voice cracking as he shouted,
"What the hell is that?"
Merrick heard the shout, but it was distant, a sound from another world. His world had narrowed to the rock's rough texture under his fingertips, the burn in his thighs, the thunder of blood in his ears. He focused on Orna's words, a shield for others. He let out a guttural roar, a sound torn from the deepest parts of his primate ancestry, and heaved. For a tense second,
the rock held fast. It was a part of the moon, an immovable object fused to its core. Then, with a deep, grinding groan of protest, it moved. Using a smaller, shattered rock as a natural fulcrum, the multi-ton slab pivoted upwards. It rose inch by agonizing inch. Merrick's vision tunneled. Black spots danced at the edges. Every muscle fiber, every tendon, every bone screamed under the colossal strain. This was the opposite of the control Turkon had demanded. The ragged, desperate limit of his power, unleashed in a single, focused act of will. The slab was high enough. "Now!" Merrick grunted through clenched teeth. Ryax and Orna, who waited for that tiny window of opportunity, dove into the space he had created. They grabbed the trapped cadet by the arms and pulled, dragging him free from the crushing weight. Quar, who stood frozen, staring, could only watch, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. "He's clear!" Ryax yelled. The moment the words registered, Merrick's strength gave out. He let the stone fall. It crashed back into a place with a ground-shaking boom that sent a plume of dust into the air. He collapsed to one knee, his entire body trembling violently with exhaustion. He gasped for air, his lungs burning. The canyon fell silent, broken only by his ragged, desperate breathing and the medic's frantic beeps now tending to the rescued cadet. He looked up. Everyone was staring at him. Quar's squad, his own squad, cadets from other units who had arrived on the scene. They all wore the same expression of profound shock. Sergeant Turkon stood over him, his anthracite face unreadable. For the first time, his bladed upper limbs relaxed from their rigid readiness, a minute shift that conveyed his astonishment. The Concord capital's suns shone brightly on the Aegis main parade ground. The graduation ceremony was a grand fair, full of pomp and circumstance. Squad 9 stood in formation, a cohesive unit, their uniforms crisp, their posture perfect. Sergeant Turkon stood before the graduating class, his dark, imposing form cutting a striking figure against the morning light. He presented the standard commendations for marksmanship, for tactical acumen, for leadership. Then he paused. "The events on Incus revealed an opportunity," his translator announced, his voice carrying across the silent field. He held up the Aegis Star, the Academy's highest honor for valor. "We award the Aegis Star for exceptional courage in the face of overwhelming odds. Traditionally, this has meant overwhelming an enemy. On Incus, Private Arcady faced an overwhelming force of nature and overwhelmed it in turn. For defense, a purpose beyond destruction. His actions have set a new precedent for what this award signifies." He walked down the line of cadets, his measured footsteps echoing on the grounds. He stopped in front of Merrick. "You have demonstrated the ultimate control, Private Arcady," Turkon said, his voice softer than Merrick had ever heard it. He pinned the heavy metal to Merrick's chest. "You have made your species proud. More importantly, you have made your instructor proud." Later, after the ceremony, Squad 9 gathered on a balcony overlooking the Aegis. Quar approached them, his movements stiff and formal. He stopped before Merrick and executed a deep Karok bow of gratitude and respect. Pip, clicking happily, perched on Orna's broad-plated shoulder. Orna herself watched Merrick, a quiet stillness in her posture. Ryax stood beside Merrick, looking out at the star-dusted horizon. He clapped a hand on Merrick's shoulder. The gesture was firm, confident, yet gentle. Merrick stood steady, accepting the gesture. He stood beside his friend, the hand's weight a welcome, comforting pressure. He was an anchor, and for the first time since he had arrived, he was at home. He looked out at the stars, a team forged in hardship and ready for whatever came next.